It's a rainy day, so it won't. None of us will be distracted from wanting to be outside. I didn't get a breath of fresh air till late yesterday, and it had gotten a little cold. But I heard it was a beautiful day. But today I won't be lured to go outside a little bit. Well, welcome back, and thank you. I hope everyone rested well last night and had a good evening. I'm just reflecting a little bit on yesterday. I was chatting with someone at the networking event, and this person said, so rarely do I actually take the time to spend 2 days away from my cell phone, away from my email, away from my office, where I have an opportunity to just be with a whole group of other people that are smart and inspiring, and to just take that time for myself. And I think as leaders in our communities, we just don't give ourselves this opportunity enough to get away, to unplug a little bit, and to just think and be inspired and imagine what could be different. And this person said, I almost didn't come because I just thought I can't possibly carve this time out. And yet you almost can't not take the time, right? If we're going to continue to do the work we're doing, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's tiring, and a lot of times it's inspiring, but if we don't take the time to just be with other people and imagine other ways, it gets really hard to sort of continue on in our day-to-day. So I'm really excited that we're here for day 2. I want to once again encourage all of us to be present. Shut off your cell phones or put them on vibrate so you're not distracted by the million other things we all have to do. And just enjoy this opportunity to really to be learning together. I'm inspired. The conversations yesterday, there was just this electricity in the room, in the hallways, at workshops, and it made me very excited about what is possible and what we can accomplish together. So thank you. And I know today's going to be another great day. One of the things we neglected to do yesterday in our zeal to kind of get us off and running is to mention that we have this amazing graphic recording artist with us for the 2 days. Her name is Angelique McAlpine, and and as you all have now witnessed, she is quite gifted at being a visual recorder of our conversations. And we were thinking, as we continue in my office to think a lot about inclusion and how we make sure we're meeting the needs of people with different learning styles. And so many of us are visual thinkers. I have a colleague who, you sit and you watch her. Where's Diana? I'm going to point you out. I mean, so many of you may know Diana Carminetti, right? And she's one of those people that she sits and she listens, and then all of a sudden it crystallizes for her and she gets up and draws a picture, and the whole conversation, everything we've been struggling with, is sort of right there in a picture in front of us, and we all say, right, that's it. And Angelique is doing that for us. She is recording our conversations. Some of her drawings are out in the hall. I'd really encourage folks, when you're grabbing lunch, if you're in line or if you're going back out to get some more breakfast, to just stop and take a peek at those, because it is really an amazing gift to us all to have this. And all of these pictures are going to be up on our website after. So you can see them, and we'll keep them, and they'll remind us of what we've done here for the past couple of days. So I'm really excited for the day. There's a lot happening today, and it's going to be good. And we're going to start with our good friend and guest. And somebody was saying that he was reading Paul's book last night. And Margaret Wheatley, I think, commented in it about the tender heart, how tender Paul is, and I thought, oh my God, that is a pretty darn good way to describe my interactions with Paul leading up to this conference, and certainly in the conversations that we had yesterday. So we're really excited to have him here again for day 2. He's obviously very accessible. Take advantage of his being here. Over lunch, over breaks, and the sessions, things like that. But anyway, Paul, thanks for being here again. We're really excited to hear your remarks. Thanks, everyone.
Good morning. Thanks again for that lovely opening. Tender heart. Just don't get me mad. I enjoyed so much engaging with you yesterday, and I was just really impressed by both of the workshops that people joined me for, and the resilience of this group, and how smart you are. Smart and beautiful. Our first workshop, we tried a process that I kind of risk using, and it's kind of an iterative deepening of a conversation, and it starts out by people being fairly light about what they're kind of interested in, and then it just starts to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and I was so impressed by how deep we went in that short period of time, and so huge thanks for that. And then, of course, we had this huge workshop. There was like almost 100 of you wanting to learn about lived experience and integrating people with lived experience. And there again, I was able to work with you in a way that you were able to bring your own innate wisdom to that learning, and to pepper it a bit, put a bit of salt on it, just so that you get a good sense of what the larger language is around this. So just huge thanks. And today I've got 2 workshops, one on collective impact the first 12 months. And so if you're looking at launching a collective impact, or you're in the midst of starting one, or you went through one and you kind of are wondering, geez, that was hard. You might find this is interesting, because I do the workshop as if I'm speaking to my board chair. And my board chair is asking me, so what are you actually going to do this year? You know, so that's, it's at that practical level. And then at the end of the day, I have a workshop on collaborative leadership, which allows us to kind of look at more how you see leadership and how you bring your own leadership into this work. But this morning, I want to share with you about deepening community, and as I say now, for something completely different. I realize there's a book over there. Can you bring that up to me, my book? Sorry, I'm hooked up, otherwise I would come and get it. Yeah. So, does everyone have this already? Oh, you do? Okay, and obviously, as you said, someone's been reading it. And I wrote this book after I wrote Community Conversations, which became a triple bestseller in Canada, which I have never been able to understand, because it's really, not this one, but the Community Conversations is really a boring book. And I've never been able to understand why that many people would want to read it. But it's like collective impact. It caught the imagination of people to think differently about this work. But I became increasingly concerned after writing that book that we take the word community for granted. We assume it. And you know what assuming does. You know? We assume it. And so we do community development work. But what's the community that we're developing? Right? Community safety, community well-being. But what does that mean? Especially if we're interested primarily in, let's say, community wellness, we're interested in population health outcomes. Well, is that really community? That's individual and family, right? And you're sort of saying, well, but there's all these community indicators. Yeah, but then I'm also asking, but is there a sense of community? And do we understand the dynamic of community and what's going on? And then, more importantly, as I started writing, I became concerned about us as professionals that are working in this field. And what is our understanding and belief in community? And what role does community play in our lives? If we don't know our neighbors, if we no longer have connections to family, if we no longer are part of a service club of some sort, or we can't identify a deep community in our own life. We have lots of community all around us. We're experiencing beautiful community here. But that sense of deep community where we can rely on others. There was a new program that was just started in Vancouver, Canada, and it was a social innovators group of young people. And they used my book to have a discussion about community, and they formed their own group called Chicken Soup Friends. And these were friends that you could rely on, that if you got sick, they would bring you chicken soup, or the vegetarian equivalent. Right? So it was like, who do we have in our lives that shore us up? And do we put our own energy and time? And why is that so important? It's important because ultimately, if the sense of community breaks down, if people don't have others that they have a deep connection with, then what is their impetus to make a better world, to make a better community? And we become very nuclear in our understanding. When we have community, small acts of caring are easy. But it is difficult when it is no longer in place. Let me read just an example of that from the book itself. This is the first story, and the editors felt that this was the one that best exemplified what we were talking about. Many times over the past 30 years, especially in connection with the work I've done with others more recently to engage communities in reducing poverty, I've been asked, what is the most important thing people can do to make a difference in the world? That's simple, I almost always reply. Bring chicken soup to your neighbor. Really? Is the typical response. I say yes and then add, but remember, I said the answer is simple, but the act of bringing soup, well, that takes work. How so? It requires that you know your neighbor. It requires that you know they are not vegetarian and like soup. It requires that you know them well enough and communicate regularly enough to know that they are sick. And once you know they are sick, you must feel compelled to want to help and to make this a priority among the many calls on your time and energy. Your neighbor must know you well enough to feel comfortable in receiving your help, and you must have a relationship to know what they prefer when they are sick, whether it is chicken soup, pho, chana masala, or even ice cream. So you see, the work takes place long before you perform the act of bringing soup. So this simple act of being able to know your neighbor well enough and feel compelled enough, and your neighbor could be even family, to be willing to reach out and to help. And why is that just so innate to us? And that's the question that I engaged in. But let's talk about this more just from a community development perspective. I've spent years working with downtown organizations, business improvement associations often, and cities. It's a passion of mine. I'm trained as a community economic developer. And I was struck in this town of Cambridge, in which they had spent this enormous budget that they had to promote their town to outside shoppers and trying to bring those shoppers in. And a new chair of the BIA came in and put a little contest out, little giveaways in different stores. And in order to be part of that giveaway, you had to give your address. You know what they found? Over 70% of the shoppers basically could walk to their store. And they had not only neglected those shoppers, they had often been fighting with those shoppers for, changes that they wanted. And so they were basically completely oblivious to the shoppers that actually were their bread and butter. They didn't understand the community around them. I do a lot of training in Deepening Community, and often we have police come who are looking to try and do better engagement so that they can make their community safer. And I ask them, how many police does it take to make a neighborhood safe? And their answer is almost always the same. It's actually, I've never, all around the world that I've asked this in every country I've spoken, it's always the same. It depends. And I say, on what? And they say, on how well the neighbors know one another and look out for one another. Because we cannot police a neighborhood, right? We can only show up when something goes wrong, right? And when a community and when a neighborhood is filled with fear, it's never safe. So again, an interesting understanding of why community is so important at that level. The very act of democracy that we take so dear requires citizens to be engaged. When there is low social capital, governance is very costly. So when citizens are not giving of their time, are not taking responsibility, and are cloistered in their homes, they're not reaching out to their neighbors, they're not caring for one another, governance is very costly. Service is less effective, and of course mutual trust diminishes. So the very act of building community is at the heart of our society. I worked in a town of Red Deer that wanted to bring in a low-income housing project that was primarily going to be serving Aboriginal people. And they were putting it in a neighborhood that was, middle to lower income, but all of the houses in that neighborhood were individually owned. And they rushed it because the money had come from the government and they wanted to spend it, and they didn't do a good job engaging with the neighbors, building a sense of community and introducing themselves to one another. And of course the neighbors rose up against the housing complex. This is not a racist community. This is a community that has always had very good relationships with their Aboriginal neighbors. And these were now urban Aboriginal neighbors that were moving into their neighborhood. But all kinds of stories were made up. And so now it was not just that the housing complex did not get approved at council, but now that whole neighborhood was deemed racist. And so the kids would go to school and they were called names, and you see where I'm going with that? What a mess they created, just because they did not take the time and assume that community was important in all of this. And when we assume those types of things, It just costs an awful lot of money. So when we start to think about this idea of collective impact, right, and how it is that we might work together, we can't forget that very important premise that if citizens are going to rise up, right, in support of reducing cancer rates, in support of ending poverty, in support of the end to violence against women, in support of the wellness of children, it requires that they have a sense of commitment and caring to their community, not just to the issue. So in that sense, collective impact as a technical piece of work and a technical idea becomes very complicated, like bringing chicken soup, if we don't have a sense of community and mutual caring in our society. Do you realize that in Canada, and I'm sure it's no different, and even maybe higher in America, that 82% of all caring that happens in our country is not paid for? 18% of all caring is paid for. So the hospital worker, the social worker, all of us, we get paid to care. But 82% of the time that caring happens every day happens because we come home and say, "How was your day, honey? How was school? Your neighbor needs a rake. Hey, I got one." Right? Or your cousin is sick and you bring them chicken soup. Your father dies and your friends come to their funeral. That's the kind of caring that makes us human. It's the kind of caring that makes life worth living. And 82% of the time, that is not paid to happen. When we go into collective impact work, I can be rest assured that 82% at least of the people who are going to care about what you are doing are not being paid to do so. They are citizens that are engaged in schools around child well-being, neighborhoods around child well-being. And even a lot of the people who are paid to care will give extra because they are humans who care about their community. And they care because they know that what they're working on is actually going to help their families and their children. So it's important for us to take that into account. Another big reason for us to invest in community itself is that for some reason we're lonely. Like we're really lonely. In Vancouver, which is like this incredible place. Like there's no reason to be lonely in Vancouver. There's just so much to do. It's the most beautiful. It's like one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's always voted one of the best places in the world to live. 71% of Vancouverites last year said they were lonely at least once a day. And it makes sense because we don't have places where we connect regularly. And our nuclear family, and I don't want to say this in a wrong way, it's just not enough to deal with that. Dear friend of mine said they went back to church recently. I said, why? He said, well, I know, I don't believe that stuff anymore. And I said, so why did you go back to church? And he said, well, look, I just didn't know where else to find community. And I grew up in church, and it was always easy. It was like a routine. I went there every Sunday. We had great potlucks. People talked to you. They cared for you. If your children get sick, they ask about that. If you're sick, they bring you meals. There is a sense of community there. And, he said, I didn't really look for a church that I believed in, was the funny part. He said, I went and looked for the church that had the best potluck. And he said, my sense was that if they had a great potluck, that means people loved each other. They put effort into their food, and then they brought that food together, and they all ate together, and they had a wonderful time, and they laughed and enjoyed one another, and then the next time they did it. And, I went to the church that had the most potlucks and the best potlucks, and that was my criteria for going to church. We're also very busy these days. We live a long way from family or the people that we grew up with. Maybe that's different in Vermont. How many of you live near your, not just your immediate family, but your extended family? Hands up. Oh man, that's not good. I thought Vermont was different. Well, I don't know, there's something in the air here because you're such lovely people, but it causes, it's difficult when you don't live near family for a whole variety of reasons, and for some of us it feels liberating for a little while. It was just a little too much deep chuckle there. But when the kids get sick, where do you take them? Right? When you're running late, who drops by? Right? Who tells you, that your yard is looking pretty forsaken, and then shows up to help you clean it up? Right? And though there's a kind of a mix to that, right, in terms of how we feel, but there is that sense that that's very important to us. Often we're overstimulated today by forces that kind of draw us in. And I don't really know about this. It's kind of like we drive up to our yards. Many of you have those buttons that you click and the door opens. Yeah, and you drive in, right? And my neighbor is unbelievable, even though I love her dearly, and we've done a lot of work building our neighborhood. She is incredible. She drives up. Then she backs in for some reason. She backs into her garage, and as she's backing, the garage door is opening. And then she just basically hits the brake, and the garage door is coming back down again. It's this most incredible synergy. It's amazing watching her come home, And then we go to our sanctuary, which is our home or our backyard, and there we sit. If we're bored, we just turn on the television. And the television entertains us. And we don't need to interact with anyone. And somehow we say to ourselves, finally I get some alone time. Right? And that turns into 2, 3, 4 hours every day. And then we start to ask some bigger questions about our lives. Is this a good way to use my time? Why is it that I have these kind of nagging feelings of loneliness? Why is it that I, don't have the energy to go out and work in my community? Why is it that I'm not engaging and interacting with other people? And it's this sense that it's almost like this velvet glove that grabs us and brings us in. We don't know our neighbors. I don't know about you, and I try. I try really hard. But, I'm trying really hard to see my best friends twice a month. It's hard. I often don't see them more than once a month. And this thing about people are, there's a whole trend about people not inviting people into their homes for dinner anymore. Right? Social capital is weakening. It's our ability, social capital is essentially the resilience we have for one another. Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, where he talks about this individual who is part of a bowling club, and they've bowled together for 15 years. And at one point he needs a new kidney. And it's one of his bowling partners that gives him that kidney. And the only thing they did together was for 17 years, 15 or 17 years, they had bowled together. There was a lot of resilience between them. If neighbors know one another and something goes wrong, there is a lot of resilience. We had an attack on our neighborhood by a developer, a really shady one. Everybody knew the person was shady. City council warned us about this developer. And the developer, after we were through with him, we were very kind, but we were 100%, not 88%, 100% in unity in acting together in a very kind way. He wanted to put 3 lots onto a 1-lot property, and we said, you can put 2 lots on that property and we will be okay with it, but no more. And we stood firm. And we, within 5 minutes, hired the best lawyer in our community, and everybody just chipped in. There was no question. But that was the power of all those potlucks we had together, right? They came together like that, right? Because we wanted to have the kind of community that we were proud of. And we loved the idea of intensification, but not at all costs. And the developer was so impressed with us, that he phoned us and said, I've never seen this happen before. I just assume that neighbors don't know one another and I can do whatever I want. Obviously, that's not going to happen in your neighborhood. So I need you to agree with me, I think, if anything's going to happen. And we said, you're right. So it's interesting, but when we start having that sense of social capital, right, where we know people are going to care for us, where we know people are going to come to our funerals, where we can work together on collective impact issues, we are strong. But it's very difficult to do collective impact when our sense of community has broken down. And I would say that today in North America, our sense of community is suffering. And I would say that for me, even someone that has written a book on it, that has spent his life trying to find it, and who works at it, it is suffering for me. It is far harder to experience community today than ever in my life. And there's a lot of systemic reasons for that. But here's the good news. People do care. They want more community. And it's not too late, and actually very easy for us to build it. Do you know that just in a little bit over a year, this book has sold now over 13,000 copies, which just gives you a sense, right, in our field, how many people care about this issue. We've developed a website, deepeningcommunity.org, that now has thousands and thousands of people who come there and try to learn regularly. And they're often everyday people as well as professionals who are trying to understand what's happening. When I put together this book, I went and talked to 500 people. I'm just going to go through some of these. That's the other artist. I went and talked to 500 people and asked them, what does community mean to you? And it was very interesting for me, because when we asked what it meant to them, it meant that people were working together somehow. It was first of all an action. And secondly, it came down to mutual support. So there was not just about the fact that community is something I feel, I have a sense of community inside of me, but that community is something that is very active and real around us, right? When we're working together, there is community. When I feel mutual support, there is community. Bodes very, very well in terms of investing in community and community building in order for our collective impact to be moving forward, because that's essentially what we're asking people to do. People also were very concerned about their geographic area. you know, your city matters, and people care about what's happening in your city. Look at this next slide. It's kind of interesting. What does community breakdown mean to you? And then look at what does a caring community mean to you and compare them. Community breakdown, isolation, individualism, lack of caring and support, conflict and hostility. And then we just had this big word, poverty, primarily because it just meant that there was a lot of social ills that were occurring that seemed to be in the study related to what's happening, versus what a caring community means. People supporting each other, inclusive, sharing opportunities. And if we look today at the state of Vermont, maybe the state of America, and certainly the state of Canada, which one of these do you think is winning right now? Which one of these would you rather be part of? And just even in your own personal life and your organizational life, right? Where are you part of these caring communities? Where are they in your life? Where is your organization investing to create these types of communities? They could be a medical facility, a hospital can be treated like a community. A school can be treated like a community. Even our own workplaces can be treated like a community. But then to understand that the world is actually the one that looks like a community that's breaking down, and to believe that's how we need to act, and we need to be strong and individualistic and get what we can get in the world. We also came to understand, I'm going to actually do the next slide first. We're going to do that one in a second. I'm going to go here and then I'm going to go back because I think it might be more logical at this point to talk about this. We also then, as we were doing our research, we were trying to understand where does community fit in to people's understanding. And we were asking, do you really have that little community in your life, as you're saying? And what was so important for us to hear is that people were saying, no, I experience community all the time. And I come to a conference like this, and I experience a sense of community. I go to a ball game, and we all do the wave. Do you guys do that here? Obviously, by the laughter, right? I feel connected to the people around me. I love going to movies because people laugh and there's a common energy there, much different than watching television, right? And so we called those shallow experiences of community. And of course, when I wrote that, I kind of meant the shallow end of a pool. Because shallow's not bad if I want to be in the shallow end or the deep end. Sometimes I want to be in the deep end, sometimes in the shallow end. But you'll get a little twinge in my book, and I tried to take it out, but there were 6 editors that Barrett Kohler, they're the largest publisher of serious nonfiction in the world, and they take it very, very seriously. And matter of fact, there is literally not a chapter there that looks remotely to the ones I gave them. They completely rewrite your book. They put, I hate to say this while I'm here, they put kind of an American edge to it where there had to be a fight going on somehow. There was shallow and deep. Shallow was bad, deep was good. It's sort of like that, but it's not really like that. It's like I like all these shallow experiences of community in my life. I love coming to a conference, and I have no delusion that I'll see all of you again. But while we're together, it's lovely, and we say hi and we smile and we say good things about one another, and we have this common experience, and that will go with us forever. Right? And we have many, many of those experiences in our lives. But what people were talking about is that they were desiring a deeper experience. So it wasn't going back to the old days where everyone knew their neighbor, where family was at the center of our attention, where we went to church and all those kind of myths about, how beautiful all that was, right? I mean, there was a lot of kind of nagging people around then too, and it was kind of annoying sometimes to be in that kind of, felt almost cloistered sometimes. But it is kind of like, do you ever kind of think to yourself, like, who's going to come to my funeral? It's an interesting thought, right? Who's going to care? How do I belong? Where do I belong? And so there is this sense that if we have a lot of shallow community in our lives, one of the things that we're wanting so badly is, I don't have enough deep experiences of community. And where might I find them? And as I always say, those deep experiences of community are often embedded in your shallow experiences. Your family has a reunion. You're saying, do I go, don't I go? Of course, if it's immediate family, you almost always go, but if it's extended family, you don't always. You get invited to a wedding that is kind of a distant third cousin. Do I go, don't I go? The question is family an important part of community for you? And do you have that fortunate nature, that fortunate experience of being able to have family close by and put some energy into that, and to realize that if I put energy into that, I will experience a deeper sense of belonging and caring? Is it your neighbors? It's very interesting in my neighborhood, where we came from, which was Pheasant Avenue. We were just lucked out. Our first home, we had our kids there, and you would never know who was coming for dinner. It was just one of those places. And if your kids were away from your home, you don't always know where they were, but it took maybe 1 or 2 phone calls and you knew at which neighbor they were at, right? It was just that kind of a neighborhood. If you were late for anything, it was 1 phone call or a text, and boom, your family was taken care of. I remember when Michael was born, he was colicky, and he would cry nonstop for 3 months. And the neighbors would walk by, going on their walk, and they would come knock on our door and say, can we take Michael? You need a walk more than we do. And they would take care of him while we would go for a walk and take a break. A beautiful experience, really. And so putting energy into that community was really easy. Marlene got tenure, and it was a long drive to the university, so we moved closer to the university. And we came to a neighborhood that we thought was fairly similar. And we had been there almost 3 months, and all the neighbors from our old neighborhood had already driven that hour to our place and thrown us a welcome party to this new neighborhood. And I hadn't even had a significant conversation with anybody. Sometimes I'd wave, and they'd kind of put their head down and wave back. And I went, oh my, And one day my kids came back from school, and they said something derogatory about one of the neighbors because they were Muslim and they wore the hijab. And I said, no, this isn't happening in my household. You're going to get to know your neighbors, right? And so I went door to door and tried to pull together a neighborhood party. And I had a date in mind, and I gave that date. And of course, the people who didn't want to come always said, oh, that date doesn't work, and thought they could close the door. And of course, I'm a community developer. That doesn't work. So I say, oh, that's no problem. Give me a date that will work for you. And so they'd give me a date that would work for them. And I said, let me go ask the rest of the neighbors. And I went around again and tried to work, well, Joe and Mary can't make it, but guess how many times I went door to door that day? 7 times around. I think they just basically gave up. And they showed up at our home, and we had a wine and cheese, and it was lovely. Shirley was the last to arrive, and I was talking to Klaus at the door. The door opened up. Shirley came in. Klaus stuck out his hand and said, "Hi, my name is Klaus." My mouth just dropped open. I knew this. They actually didn't. Klaus had lived there for 14 years, Shirley for 12. They were 4 houses apart. There were 3 houses in between them. Yeah. Hi, my name is Klaus. 5 years later, we had a big snowstorm, and we had a late fall gathering because Ramadan was pulling us to a later time. And there was a big snowstorm, and all of us got out there first thing in the morning and cleared the entire road, because our road never gets cleared for 3 days when there's a big snowstorm, because we're always the last ones to get our road cleared. And Klaus had to go to chemo. And we knew that because we had a party the night before. That evening, some friends came over to one of our neighbors, and she sent an email after, and she said, I went for a walk with my friends today, and they were envious that I lived in a neighborhood where we knew one another, and more importantly, that we cared for each other enough to go and clear the road when we knew someone was in need. So I share that story because it was relatively easy. 7 times, yeah, that took a bit, but it was relatively easy to bring neighbors together. And, you know, it's my thing. They all have their thing now, and, you know, I get organic eggs from Ali and Sohela, you know. Bob will bring something over, and he's a good fixer, you know. Even Shirley, who backs in perfectly into her driveway, brought over some kind of fermented cabbage thing. And a famous family recipe that was actually quite good, you know. We reach out to one another. They give me every time we meet, which is at least 2 or 3 times a year together, they give me all these applauds about how grateful they are that someone took the time to build our neighborhood. It doesn't take much, but the benefits are so amazing. Community is something we want in our lives. How many of us have children in our lives, whether they're our own children or children that we care about? How many of us are just really concerned about their physical well-being, that they get enough exercise, that they eat right, that kind of thing? Yeah. Community is good for your children, as it is for you, right? I mean, first of all, if for no other reason than you want community in your life, because we're not all that good as parents. And we need help. So, you know, that sense is that there is a sense of identity that is shaped. You know the story of the son who had an alcoholic father, and his chance of becoming an alcoholic are something like 80% statistically. But all that son needs is one other adult male in their lives that is shaping them and identifying with them, and that falls by 50%. And if they have 2 to 3, they're back to normal. Just interesting, right? I mean, if we have more adult people in their lives, in our kids' lives, their identity is stronger. You know, Nelson Mandela uses that word Ubuntu. You know, I am through you, right? I see myself the way that you see me. So our community shapes our sense of identity, helps us understand our strengths, helps us grow stronger. of course, community fills that very innate need for belonging. That sense that I belong somewhere, that I'm important. I've talked a lot about caring and being cared for and that role that's within it. I found the last three to be very interesting. Study after study has shown that the strongest economies are the economies where people work together. You know, in our town, we are now the Silicon Valley of Canada. We were just voted the #1 place in the world. We just beat out Silicon Valley as the #1 place in the world to get financing for a new startup tech company, right? You know why? We have an organization there called Communitech. It started almost right at the beginning, the Community of Technology Companies. And one of the things that is at the raison d'etre of this one is we will help you, but when you're successful, you will help the next one. And there is this beautiful chart, and it's got hundreds and hundreds of companies in it. It starts with Electra Home in the middle, and then it goes all the way out like this, including BlackBerry is in there, which became a multi-billion-dollar company. And just to give you a sense, when Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie became billionaires, they each put about $500 million into the community. Right? Mike Lazaridis, with his billions, has now set up a company that just invests in high-risk, high-tech businesses, not only because they're profitable for him, but because he believes that he needs to give back. So we are one of the strongest economic regions in the country, primarily because of community tech, and they work in that kind of way. I spent years as an employment counselor, and I just came to understand that when people had multiple relationships in their lives and they become unemployed, they too had this sense of, if they had community in their lives, they could fall back on someone, get a little loan, or people would look out for them and they would find jobs easier because they have many eyes out there looking for openings. But when people were completely isolated and they came to our community, they ended up being often very quickly falling onto welfare and then spiraling downward because there was no support mechanism for them. And what was so interesting is that how important I became in their lives. And I thought, wow, like I'm an employment counselor working with these individuals. How can I become important in their lives? But I was kind of like their lifeline. They depended on me. They were kind of hoping that I was going to save them, right? Health is another very interesting one. And think about this. Dr. Dean Ornish, one of the great cardiologists in the world. How many of you know the name? A good number of you. He noticed that his cardiac patients that had community in their lives lived longer and healthier than those that didn't. So he did a study and wrote a book called Love and Survival. And what he did is, I remember this test that I loved. He put a cold on a litmus stick and he stuck it up people's noses. And they would then fill out a form, and that form said how many, if you were designated with terminal cancer, how many people would you tell in the first week? And if you statistically told less than 3, your chance of getting a cold was close to 70%. And if you told more than 7, your chance of getting a cold was about 30%. So just interesting. I don't know what all the scientific reasons are for that. And I'm always a skeptic of studies like that. But the one that I really liked was that he studied single moms. And he looked at the birth weights of their babies. And he said that those single moms that had 7 or more relationships in their lives, their babies were 1.5 pounds heavier than those that had less than 3. And doesn't that just make sense? I mean, that I get, because, this mother then said, can you eat, have you eaten well? Are you taking care of yourself? Can I help you? Can I give you things? Right? All those things of nurturing and caring around her helps her to have a healthier child. And that makes a lot of sense. But my favorite of all is this notion that community makes us happier. And honestly, you know, when I first wrote the book, there were very few books out. In the last 5 years, there's a proliferation of books on happiness. And guess what almost every one of them say? Get more community in your life. There's this economist, John Halle, he's out of the University of British Columbia, just out in Vancouver. And he's part of a growing movement worldwide. Obama is very big on this, called the Economics of Happiness. And they're basically saying we're tired of the quality of life being rated by our GDP, our gross domestic product. And so they looked at all these wellness factors, and they said these are far better indicators of our quality of life. And guess how just John Halle, he's a very serious economist, and he has this very kind of tight demeanor when he's presenting. And then all of a sudden at the very end of his talk, he says, and remember, the most important thing you can do to build happiness into your life is the more we get together, the more we get together, and your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the... Before I go into how then do we build community, I want you to do a little exercise. And I'm not going to do a triad, I'm just going to do a dyad today. I'd love you to find one person you don't know, just one person. You can turn around, it could be at your table. And I just want you each to take 5 minutes to share your first memory of community. Your first memory, or maybe your most profound experience of community. Okay? So just if you could just find someone, talk to them, and please, I'll tell you when 5 minutes is up. And okay, just go. I'm always struck at how common that is, and how easily we're able to find that story of community in our lives. And how many of you, when you shared your story, shared like an early memory of community, like a first memory? Very nice. How many of you kind of did more of a profound memory, like a community that might be most important to you now? Nice, nice. So yeah, and did any of you find it really hard to find a good story of community in your lives? We had a couple, yeah. Because it's not always easy to find and to look there. And I always enjoy spending time with individuals that struggle, and then kind of work back and to sort of see where that experience was, and whether it's just that there's a sort of a dominant negative experience that clouds the positive ones, or what else there is. We're coming near the end of the talk, and there's 2 more things I want to do. I want to just give you some ideas of what our study showed in terms of then how do you build community both in your lives and in the organizations that you have available. And then I'm going to close the morning by showing you a video that was done by a group of young people who read the book, and then submitted the video to the Alternative Video Awards, which is a worldwide awards. It's like the Oscars, and in their age category won the Global Award. I think you'll really enjoy it, and it says a lot about this work. But I want to start with these 4 elements and talk you through them a little bit around how they might help us both in our organizations and in our personal lives. First of all, let me go through them all 4 very quickly around how then does one deepen community in our personal lives, and then I can sort of apply them to how that might work for collective impact. So one of the things we did is when we were looking for kind of a magic formula that people would say, well, this is how I get more community in my life. And what we came up with was 4 things that are just really as simple to understand, and I was a little disappointed by that. I wanted something more profound. But it's actually really quite straightforward. Share our stories, have fun together, or enjoy one another, learn to care for one another, and work together for a better world. And so basically, the first one was that when we talk to one another, when we share our stories, it's like our neighbors. When we started talking to one another and we knew each other's stories, it somehow opens a door. There's a channel there that is opened, and we can talk to one another much more openly and frequently, and we want to talk, and it's no longer hard. Someone said, "You will never fear someone whose story you know." And I love that saying and that statement. So it's sometimes that simple. It's not just talking to one another, it's knowing your story. So when I say your first memory of community, it's an important story. For neighbors, it might be, can you talk about your experience with neighbors from the neighborhood that you came through, for other neighborhoods that you came from? It could be that, or tell me about your family. But it helps to open us up to one another in a very unique way. The second one is really around enjoying one another. A lot of congregations, faith communities, have taken this book and used it because they want to explore not only the relationship that they have with their God, but they want to talk about relationships with each other. And they see them as being equally important. And so they ask this notion about, why do we want to have fun together? And the book talks about that in some really interesting ways. And what I decided to do is I looked at a lot of studies on the role of play amongst animals. And there's a lot of play theory that comes out of that line of work, and it was just fascinating. And it just showed that when we play together, something opens up between us, there's a new relationship, we can have conflict in play, and it's just play. We go off together, play some sport together, get angry, but then go off and have a beer together, And it's this lovely kind of thing that we can do. And it's something that's just so innate to us. So again, so dirt easy, just have fun, with other people, and do that on a regular basis. Learn to care for one another is maybe a little bit more complicated or difficult to place. But in reality, it's as simple as looking out for opportunities to care. And in a sense, not necessarily expecting that to be reciprocal, but to be around people that have that kind of relationship, and to try to bring it back into maybe even family relationships or neighborhood relationships. It's as simple for us that caring is fundamental in deepening community, because we actually define community as mutual acts of caring happening often. Mutual acts of caring happening often. A good friend of mine, his mother was put into a nursing home, and I said, how is it going? And he said, well, it's okay. And I said, only okay? It's a brand new facility, lots of good people there, what's going on? And he said, well, my mom was always at her best when she was caring for others. And they had taken that away from her. And so it made her sad. So it's just another interesting point. The last one is working together for a better world. We often nickname this one the Habitat for Humanity effect. Have you ever heard a Habitat for Humanity worker come from a build and say, you guys all know Habitat for Humanity? Yeah, they come from a build and they go, oh my God, that was just so awful, and it was so much work, and I hurt my thumb, and once in a while you get someone like that. But for the most part, they come out of a Habitat build and they go, my gosh, I got way more out of that than I ever gave, and look at all the neat people I met. I'm gonna connect with those people for a long time, right? And there's something about this notion of working together, and it was by far the number one way that people experience deep community. What does that say for us in collective impact, right? And they said, when I work together with others on something altruistic, right, it's our collective altruism. And it's almost like when I open my heart to others, with others, we open our hearts to each other. And it's a beautiful understanding. It has a lot to say with how we think about volunteerism in our organizations. It has a lot to do even in terms of how we do team building within our organizations. and this notion of how collective altruism builds this sense of deeper community amongst us. It talks about the work of collective impact and how it is that when we work together to create a better world on almost any issue, and we take the time to build a sense of community amongst the people who are working together, how much stronger we will be. And it takes us back then to even how we create our organizations, you know. How do we build our hospitals in a way, and our medical facilities in a way where the informal caregiver, the 82% of the people who are in there helping, who are the people sitting beside the bed, that they are given priority. And I know many modern hospitals are rethinking that element of care where they even often refuse to put a chair beside the bed. Now that's all changing, and thank goodness that we're creating those types of opportunities. The notion of having fun together, we've learned long about this just in terms of team building inside of our organizations. But we also know that in neighborhood development, this becomes a really important element. This book was tested in a neighborhood where we worked with 1,000 homes, and we developed a neighborhood association in that neighborhood. They adopted those 4 principles: share your story, have fun together, learn to care for one another, work together for a better world. They would have a lot of, the first potluck had almost 200 people come to it, and that's just been ongoing. They love music in that neighborhood, and they decided that they wanted to share their music with the rest of the city, and so they close down their whole neighborhood once a year, and they create a block party. And up to 30 bands will play on 10 different porches in the neighborhood, spread out, and it's called the Uptown West Porch Party. Marvelous. And this year, of course, in Canada, we brought in now 32,000 Syrian families. And the first thing this neighborhood did, such a proud moment for me because they were not organized. They did not have a neighborhood association. They weren't connecting with one another. And when it came time to bring a Syrian family in, they raised $32,000 for a private sponsorship. And we have private sponsorships in Canada. And someone opened up their home. They duplexed their home, made half of it for the Syrian family. What a lovely, lovely testament of people caring for one another, having fun together, working together, and building a better world together. To end, I want to show you this video, and I want you to kind of look at it through the eyes of our youth.
Bombings in Boston, genocides worldwide, forces innocent people to run away and hide. Hate and fear bring people together, but something positive would be a lot better. People stick close to overcome their fear. The fact this is forced makes me shed a fair tear. If you don't know why, this would make me cry, because humans shouldn't die for community that is a lie. You can't blame people, fear is just an impulse, especially if you step outside and so just blow your limbs off. You can't refuse, you have to fight, or people in black will come at midnight, bamboozled and bare. Our brothers don't remember where or when they won't get to see their family again. Now weapons of mass destruction go to the highest bidder, so let me give you something to consider. Community based on fear opposes itself, so let's put that one right back on the shelf. We really need to stop being so ignorant and dig deeper to find something different.
We need to tell a story and enjoy our lives together, to hinder the storm and colder weather. Caring for everyone in your life, working towards the end goal, making the world a better place for every soul. We need to tell our story and enjoy our lives together, to hinder the storm and colder weather. Caring for everyone in your life, working towards the end goal, making the world a better place for every soul.
When you communicate rare rarely alone regularly, and only join events when it seems necessary. You never take the time to accommodate your neighbors. Shallow community does no one any favors. If you don't know your local residents at all, your sense of local friendship is irrelevant and small. If no one ever tries to deepen bonds, consequently the region that you live in will be spiritless and empty. It's all about forming legitimate relations, meaning you should probably know what your neighbor's name is, meaning you should know that the shallow blame is on each and every one of us if we don't get acquainted. And yo, you always need to give it a try, cause if not you won't know, then you'll wonder why the place that you live in just doesn't provide the sense of acceptance sought by you and I. You only get one chance in this life to strive. Don't just sit there and let life pass you by. Said you only get one chance in this life to strive. Don't just sit there and let life pass you by.
We need to tell our story and enjoy our lives together, to handle the storm and colder weather, caring for everyone in your life, working towards the end goal, making the world a better place for every soul. We need to tell our story and enjoy our lives together, to handle the storm and colder weather, caring for everyone in your life, working towards the end goal, making the world a better place for every soul.
You see, the point of the song wasn't to sound cynical. The last two verses were to emphasize the pinnacle, the most pure and wholesome community, the one that creates the strongest type of unity, a feeling deeper than the ocean. So let me tell you how to start the motion. Find opportunities for ongoing connection, and your life will point in a whole new direction. In this community, you are always welcome. Try it out, and you'll love the outcome. If you try, you can see how great the world can be through deepening community.
And when each and every human makes acceptance a priority, that's when common people harmonize with their authority. That's when conflicts are resolved by using peaceful methods. People caring, equal sharing, learning useful lessons, joining and expressing thoughts like sisters and like brothers, taking care of yourself and then taking care of others. It starts with getting past our differences and then embracing every walk of life, gay, straight, black, white, or Asian. We start it small and let it grow and exercise our patience, cause it will spark and slowly come to each and every nation. When we are cold and we're reserved, our unity is weakened, but through compassion and respect, community is deepened.
We need to tell a story and enjoy our lives together, to hinder the storm and colder weather, caring for everyone in your life, working towards the end goal, making the world a better place for every soul.